So welcome back to our podcast. That's up.
It didn't suck half faith. Welcome back, guys.
Okay, so what I wanted to talk about today was Thor. Last week and the week before, we had talked Incredible Hulk and Iron Man.
Right.
So today I wanted to actually spend some time focusing on Thor.
Right.
Which I think is going to be a little bit complicated, just because of how his films are a bit designed.
Mm-hmm.
They were designed to flesh out more of the world than they were to flesh out the character.
Yeah.
So the first thing that when Thor 1 opens up, we open up with Jane Foster, who in fact isn't Thor. And the reason for this is a writing tactic called nonlinear storytelling.
Right.
And with nonlinear storytelling, it's exactly what it sounds like. You don't tell the story linearly to tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that, like, you have plot points go from like D, F, E, B, A, C.
Right.
I mean, though some writers are capable of that, and kudos to them. But oftentimes, the most common way that you see this is within like the first 15 minutes or within the last 15 minutes of the film.
Exactly.
So, that was funny.
Take your time.
Okay. One of the common ways of doing this that I've seen done, whether it's comic or film, is the revenge story. You kind of find out how I got here. It was done in Deadpool.
Yeah.
Deadpool 2. And in Deadpool.
Yeah, in the first one.
Where we're being told the story from the main character's perspective. But he or she is reminiscing on that.
Yeah, it starts off at a later date.
Yeah.
And they go all the way back and then work their way back to where they started off from.
Yeah. And what Thor does something a little bit different when it comes to nonlinear storytelling. They do it to kind of shift focus on perspective. And here they are again playing with perspective. They start the film starting off with Jane Foster, and you would think Jane is important, but overall, no, she's not. And when we see Jane, you actually get a pretty well done scene, and it shows. And I say pretty well done because it depicts her character very well.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, so well that we really didn't need many other scenes with her. At least when it came to showing how intelligent she was.
Yeah.
One thing that we saw is that she liked to get things done. Like she's a very ambitious and passionate scientist. And if she believes she's right, it doesn't matter. Come hell or rain, she's out there trying to do it.
Trying to prove, how right she is.
Yeah, and to her, it doesn't matter the amount of danger. And this is something that is put on heavy emphasis, even if it was to introduce Thor to the audience and to us. And they do a very interesting they do a very interesting thing with nonlinear storytelling, because by starting the film off from Jane Foster's perspective, you are in fact starting off from the audience's perspective. And the audience's perspective from this point forth has been from science.
Mm-hmm.
We understand the MCU from a basis of science. And that is Jane Foster's character. She understands things from a basis of science. And they use this nonlinear storytelling to show this. And by showing this, they end up doing something else, which is the next topic, or the next point on today's topic. Which is mixing worlds. They do mixing worlds very well. Mixing the worlds of man and God versus science and magic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's as Jane, essentially, the audience is Jane, unfortunately, in the movie. Though we know that Thor is actually telling the truth when he says, "I am Thor of Asgard." Essentially, though, we're from Jane's perspective. We're still in awe every time we see Thor use his abilities. We don't know how his abilities work. For all intents and purposes, the Odin Force is actual magic.
Yeah.
In how Thor will put it in a very funny yet in an idiotic way. It's space magic.
Yeah, it's just space magic, guys. It's something we can't even comprehend.
Yeah, and that's something that Thor's character actually admits in Endgame, that he doesn't understand, how space magic works, and in that admittance, in fact, he admits that he doesn't really understand how his powers work.
Exactly.
One of the things that I realized with watching this film, Odin plays with a lot of mind games with his children.
Mm-hmm.
A significant amount of manipulation goes on with the 15,000+ years that Odin raised Thor. He raised Thor believing, one, that Mjolnir was made for him, and in fact it wasn't. And that in itself was a stopgap measure, a measure to kind of control Thor, to make sure that he wasn't doing what he actually ended up doing in his first film, which was starting wars.
Mm-hmm.
Odin knew how powerful he could be, which is why he took precautions to essentially maintain his power. He had him believing that his power came from Mjolnir, and then when he blocked him from this power, he made it seem like it was still in the hammer.
Yeah.
Making it seem like though, who should ever be worthy, to lift the hammer shall, wield the power of.
But I mean, it kind of is, not to jump 19 movies ahead, but when Cap picks up Mjolnir, I mean, he's like, if the thing that tripped me out is, yes, the power is within. Like you said, Odin tried to, whosoever be worthy, but Cap picked that ish up. He was throwing lightning bolts around like if he was Thor.
Yes, but you also forget that what Mjolnir was set to be. It's a storm. It's a living storm inside of his hammer.
Well, in the comics.
True.
In the comics.
True.
Because in the MCU, they try to make it say that, well, not try to, but they say that the storm is within Thor rather, and the hammer was just
from a
crutch, whatever you want to call it, or either a crutch or it amplified it or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm. And you can also argue with Thor being the king of Asgard, technically, and basically taking all of the Odin Force onto himself. Even if he doesn't realize that that's what he's doing, he could have honestly granted Captain America the ability to do that.
Possibly.
Just by him still believing that that's what the hammer is. Because then that would also go back to his whole "I knew it" kind of remark, even though Cap willingly chose not to lift it. In my argument, I feel that he willingly chose not to lift it.
Yeah, he didn't. Yeah, he willingly chose. But on another hand, even though Odin did place the enchantment, I mean, I don't know. That's the thing about.
There's a lot of ambiguity with the Odin Force. And this is one of the most important things. Is as a writer, you have to know how your main character's abilities work through and through. Just like if it was your own ability, for all intents and purposes, you need to pretend that it is your own ability. Yeah. Because when they're put in situations and you need them to be creative and use their ability in a non-straightforward way, this is the time to shine. Mm-hmm. This is the time that you're actually able to do that. And we realize that it's Thor's lack of knowledge of how his own power works that actually holds him back.
Right.
We after he spoke to his to Odin, beyond the grave in Thor Ragnarok, we see that he kind of looks beyond this barrier briefly, apparently, but we've yet to see that power, and we can definitely see it with his next come out if the rumors are true.
Yeah, if the rumors.
Him
being in Guardians 3 and
Beta Ray Bill.
and Thor 4, whatever that may persist of, if it's happening.
Yeah, if it's happening. And, that's the finicky thing about rumors.
Yeah, and that's something that we'll dive deeper in on Free Ball Thursday.
Yeah.
Our next show that's coming out soon.
So Marvel. Okay, so one of my favorite lines in all of MCU happens actually in Thor, where Thor is explaining the 9 realms to Jane, and he says
and the world tree and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that magic is just science you yet to discover, kind of thing. And it's like you even see this be put into practice in Thor 2 when Jane goes to Asgard and she's on their recovery bed. And
they're saying one thing and she's like, oh, she's drawing connections to what she would use in her field of work, like an electromagnet, whatever they were using to check out. Yeah, or they were using an X-ray machine on there, and she used the proper term for an X-ray machine.
It was a quantum field generator.
Yeah,
and that is a real thing, by the way. In theory, it is an actual it's quantum mechanics. And that's the thing that I actually liked a lot about the Thor. There's a lot of real science in there. They actually did a lot of real world research and referred to actual scientists when it came to building not just Thor, but some aspects of the MCU as a franchise.
Right.
Just to briefly get off the topic, I know for Ant-Man and fleshing out the quantum realm, they referred to some actual scientists that are currently at not the top of the field, but up there in the field of theoretical science. And it's I believe they referred to actually one of the top people in the field when it came to getting ready to flesh out their multiverse and explaining multiple dimensions and making sure that they're scientifically accurate and everything. And it's just interesting because we're getting a little bit of magic without it being called magic.
Right.
And we're only get that in Thor, and it's it's super interesting. There's one thing that I actually liked the Thor 1 for is how they take two polarizing different things that was always said to never work together and say that no, they're just one and the same thing, just two different groups in two different mindsets, naming them different. And that's kind of again one of the biggest things that I can't put enough emphasis on is perspective. It's knowing what's correct for a character versus knowing what's actual fact is completely different. Take, for example, flat earthers. For flat earthers, for all intents and purposes, that's legit. Earth is flat. There is nothing you can do to convince them otherwise that there is no conspiracy going on about Earth being round.
Hold on.
No.
Hold on. You're telling me that Earth is freaking flat? Man, this whole time I thought it was a cylinder. This whole time I thought Earth was in a cylinder shape.
Like a glass cup?
I was thinking more. I can't even. Sorry, guys. No, I don't believe the Earth is a goddamn cylinder. I don't even believe it's flat. It's not flat.
Yeah.
At me all you want, guys. I don't care.
But this is my point. For people, perspective is everything when it comes to storytelling. Perspective is everything when it comes to life. My perspective is my fact. And that's something that has to always be remembered by, like, the writer. The perspective of the character is fact. For Thor, fact is magic.
Mm-hmm.
Magic exists. He goes to school and he learns magic.
Mm-hmm.
He goes to academies for magic. He gets tested on magic.
Mm-hmm.
But for Earth, magic isn't real. Magic doesn't exist. It's only science. And this is how we do these things based off of science mechanically instead of spiritually. Hence the polarizing difference in what Frigga called the machine versus what Jane called it. And she, I believe she called it like a spiritual something, like
it was something
along
about a soul.
About being able to look at
the soul and kill the soul, whatever.
Yeah, and it was just funny because
I don't
she said it
remember
in such a
Thor 2,
condescending way, and she's like, "Yeah, quantum field generator."
Mm-hmm.
And it is
because she asked the question first,
yeah,
and then Frigga explained it, and she's like, "Oh yeah, no."
One of my biggest
exactly
realizations when I was writing, or while I'm still in the process of writing my entire franchise, like anthology.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things that I realized was not just about perspective, but like when it comes to like language. And this is one of the key things to remember. There are 150 plus ways to say ball.